Well, hey Element, welcome back from Easter break. I hope you had a fantastic Easter, and I hope you celebrated with us, whether it was one of our campuses or online or in person, that we got to celebrate the resurrection together. And the resurrection brings up a lot of questions. Totally worth talking about and totally acknowledge. What do I want to say? What's the word? Valid. That's it. Valid, totally valid that the resurrection would bring up a ton of questions. And doubt has been a part of literally everybody's faith that I know of. There might be someone who, from the second they heard about Jesus, no questions asked, 100%, never doubted. I don't know. Maybe Jesus himself never doubted. That might be the only person who never not doubted. But we read the Gospels, like you can go back and you can find this character named Thomas. And a lot of people say, oh, don't be a doubting Thomas. I don't know. He was a logical guy. He was courageous. He sometimes boldly led the way in the whole disciple crew of being like, hey, if Jesus is going to go die, let's go die with him. He was a courageous guy, but he used his brain and he just couldn't figure out how somebody had been raised from the dead. He was like, I got to see this with my own eyeballs if I'm going to believe it. So this happened where Jesus died and they found the empty tomb. They knew the tomb was empty. They didn't know where Jesus went. We'll talk more about that later. But apparently they were all sitting around there just playing cards, like terrified. So they were in a town away, basically in a upstairs room with a locked door, like making sure, because they figured they were next. Like people were going to come kill them next. And at some point they got tired of sitting in there. We're like, will someone run to Walmart and get some like party mix or something like this? This is lame. And so Tom was like, yeah, whatever, I'll go. I don't know if this is actually what happened. Thomas wasn't there. He decided to leave. Okay. When Thomas was gone, Jesus arrived in that place, like walked through the wall, and they were all like, ah! And he's like, hey, peace be with you. I know it's going to freak you out, but I've raised from the dead. And they were like, no way. And then Jesus he like snapped his fingers and he was gone or something like that. You read about it. And Thomas comes back. Could you imagine the FOMO? Thomas, you're never going to believe this, but Jesus literally just walked through the wall. I can't believe you missed it. And he goes, I don't believe you. I won't believe it until I get to see him myself. I won't believe it until I touch the nail holes in his hands and where the spear went into his side. Until I can literally touch his wounds, I don't believe it. And Jesus didn't go, well, forget that guy. I'm never going to talk to him again. What Jesus does is he appears again to them and then addresses Thomas and goes, here you go. Here's what you asked for, which is so beautiful. And so if we're holding doubt in a place in our hearts, like doubt just has no place here. I don't know. Even Jesus met Thomas where he was there. I think I have these conversations with people where, I try to gauge where they're at with Jesus. It's a very hard conversation to get into, but sometimes I use percentages and I'm just like, well, I mean, like, where are you at with this? And I was talking to a guy and he goes, I'm at about 90%. And I was like, God will use 90%. Well, 10% doubt's probably healthy. Let's lean into this. You got 5% faith, you got 50% faith, 60% faith, whatever. Bring what you got and God will use it. I think our biggest problem is that we've thought that if we have any doubts at all, then our faith is invalid. And that just can't be true. There's too many questions. And for some of us, the biggest problem is we think of a doubt or we get something from TikTok or YouTube or somebody at school says something and we have this doubt and then we see it as a dead-end road. Like we just say, well, I kind of doubt the miracles and it might have just been coincidence. And then all of a sudden your faith shuts off. Doubt isn't the dead end to our faith. You need to see doubt like resistance training. Here's how you solve this issue. Imagine if I was trying to get stronger at bench press, okay? But all I ever did was lay down on the bench, didn't use the bar. I just laid down and I just went like this. Athletes. Does that work? No. It's called resistance training for a reason. It's called progressive overload for a reason. You add weights almost to the point where you can't finish 10 reps or whatever you're working towards, and you have resistance. And what happens when you have resistance? You grow. Your muscles grow. I think that's doubt in our faith. When you have doubt, your faith, when you have doubt, your faith grows. When you have some resistance, it challenges you forward to grow. So what if doubt was actually essential to your faith? not antithesis to it, not the opposite of it, but it was actually like a sandwich. Like you got to have a slice of doubt in there to keep growing. I think there's a solution found in that if we just accept the fact that we're going to have doubts, and then also accept the fact that our doubts don't change who Jesus is and what he's done. Just because you have a doubt about the resurrection, or just because you have a doubt about Jesus being the Son of God, doesn't mean that he didn't do miracles, and doesn't mean that he didn't raise from the dead. You just put too much weight on your own opinion there. And what other, let's take a historical moment, okay? Let's say World War II. And you say, I doubt World War II happened. Did you just erase World War II with your doubt? Absolutely you didn't. There's a whole host of answers and evidence to say, no, World War II actually happened. And just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. You're not that important. The same goes for the resurrection of Jesus, or Jesus's life, or his miracles, or the fact that he did what he did and said what he said. Just because you doubt it, it doesn't change history. You've just thought a little too highly of your doubt. So maybe try this. Maybe try doubting your doubt. I remember some of the most critical moments of my faith in college is when I started to actually write down or talk about the doubts that I had about Jesus. And then I found out that there was actually answers. And I was like, bring it on. And I didn't realize that I never took my doubt in a doubtful way. Like I didn't ever go, maybe I'm wrong and I'm missing information that the resurrection really did happen. And I just think because I couldn't do it, that Jesus couldn't do it. And then I started doubting my doubt. Well, just because I couldn't raise from the dead doesn't mean that if there is a God and he sent Jesus, that he couldn't raise Jesus from the dead, because that's child's play if he created the whole universe by going, universe begin, and it went, just raising a body from the dead isn't that complicated after that. Maybe you need to doubt your doubts. I want to take the rest of this message. I'll come back and talk to you at the end. There's a ministry called Reasonable Faith. It was really important to me when I was coming into following Jesus. It's led by a guy named Dr. William Lane Craig. He's been an apologist, teaching and having constructive conversations about the evidence that backs up Christian faith. He's a philosophy doctorate. He's been doing this for decades. And this next video takes his teaching and his research over decades and decades and kind of puts it together to show you some of the top doubts about the resurrection. Maybe you didn't even know these existed. Some of the top doubts of the resurrection and why those actually don't totally work, and that it actually is pretty plausible. There is a pretty good chance that if there is a God, that he raised Jesus from the dead and there is a resurrection. Pretty crazy. Check this out. I don't care if you get everything about it. I don't care if you understand all of it or you memorize it, whatever. What I want to show you is that there's answers to your questions out there. So even if this shoots way over your head, you understand that the doubts that people have, there's actually a way that you can look into those, think about those, understand those, research those, and actually not let doubts be a dead end, but actually let it be some resistance training to let you grow. Check out this video and I'll talk to you afterwards.
It's a matter of historical record that Jesus of Nazareth died and his body was placed in a tomb. It's also been firmly established that after his death and burial, his tomb was found empty. Various individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive, and his disciples somehow became absolutely convinced that Jesus had risen from the dead. These are the historical facts. How do you explain them? Down through history, various naturalistic explanations have been offered to explain away these facts. Let's examine the four most popular ones. First, the conspiracy theory. According to this view, the disciples faked the resurrection. They stole Jesus' body from the tomb and then lied about seeing Jesus alive, thereby perpetrating the greatest hoax of all time. However, this theory faces overwhelming objections. It's hopelessly anachronistic. It looks at the disciples' situation through the rear-view mirror of Christian history, instead of from the standpoint of a first-century Jew. Jews had no concept of a Messiah who would be defeated and executed by Israel's enemies, much less rise from the dead. In Jewish thinking, the resurrection of the dead was a general event that takes place only after the end of the world and has no connection at all with the Messiah. The conspiracy theory also fails to address the disciples' obvious sincerity. People don't willingly die for something they know is not true. An honest reading of the New Testament makes it clear. These people sincerely believed the message they proclaimed and were willing to die for. For these and other reasons, no scholar defends the conspiracy theory today. A second attempt to explain the facts is the apparent death theory. Jesus didn't really die. He revived in the tomb, somehow escaped, and managed to convince his disciples he was risen from the dead. This theory also faces insurmountable obstacles. First, it's medically impossible. The Roman executioners were professionals. They knew what they were doing and made sure their victims were dead before taken down. Moreover, Jesus was tortured so extensively that even if he was taken down alive, he would have died in the sealed tomb. Second, this theory is wildly implausible. Seeing a half-dead man who crawled out of the tomb, desperately in need of bandaging and medical attention, would hardly have convinced the disciples that he was gloriously risen from the dead. As a result, no New Testament historians defend this theory today. A third explanation is the displaced body theory. Perhaps Joseph of Arimathea placed Jesus' body in his tomb temporarily because it was convenient. But later, he moved the corpse to a criminal's common graveyard. So, when the disciples visited the first tomb and found it empty, they concluded that Jesus must have risen from the dead. Once again, this theory cannot make sense of the facts. Jewish laws prohibited moving a corpse after it was interred, except to the family tomb. What's more, the criminal's graveyard was located close to the place of execution, so that burial there would not have been a problem. Also, once the disciples began to proclaim Jesus' resurrection, Joseph would have corrected their mistake. So, once again, no current scholars endorse this theory. Finally, the hallucination theory. The disciples didn't really see Jesus, but just imagined that he appeared before them. They were all hallucinating. This theory also faces considerable problems. First, Jesus appeared not just one time, but many times. Not just in one place, but in different places. Not just to one person, but to different persons. Not just to individuals, but to groups of people. And not just to believers, but to unbelievers as well. There is nothing in the psychological casebooks on hallucinations comparable to these resurrection appearances. Second, hallucinations of Jesus would have led the disciples to believe at most that Jesus had been transported to heaven, not risen from the dead, in contradiction to their Jewish beliefs. Moreover, in the ancient world, visions of the deceased were not evidence that the person was alive, but evidence that he was dead and had moved on to the afterworld. Finally, this theory doesn't even attempt to explain the empty tomb. Thus, the four most popular naturalistic theories fail to explain the historical facts. Where does that leave us? Another possibility is the explanation given by the original eyewitnesses that God raised Jesus from the dead. Unlike the other theories, this makes perfect sense of the empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus alive, and the disciples' willingness to die for their belief. But is this explanation plausible? After all, it requires a miracle, a supernatural act of God. Think about it. If it's even possible that God exists, then miracles are possible, and this explanation cannot be ruled out. And surely it's possible that God exists. So how do you explain the resurrection?
So why is the resurrection such a big deal? It's because if it didn't happen, our faith is useless. One of the guys who wrote like pretty much the entire New Testament, his name is Paul, basically boiled it down to, if the resurrection happened, we need to absolutely trust and follow Jesus and give him our everything. If it didn't happen, we are the biggest laughingstock on the face of the planet. But the resurrection did happen. And so we have hope for eternity. Just because you have doubts doesn't mean that you get to change history. Just because you have doubts doesn't mean that you get to change evidence. Just because you have doubts doesn't mean Jesus isn't who he said he was and that he didn't do the things that he did. It's just a part of having responsibility and faith, is approaching doubts with curiosity, with good conversation, talking to people you trust, not just anybody on the internet or not somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, but actually seeking that out and letting it, praying about it, actually looking into the Word of God and seeing what God says, having conversations with your coaches, your small group, saying, hey, I really doubt this whole, like, why do bad things happen to good people if God is God? Talk about it. See where you end up. God can handle that kind of stuff. And here's the deal. So if the resurrection is what it was, that means you're offered resurrection too. Next Wednesday, we're going to be talking about baptism. This Sunday is a baptism Sunday at church on both campuses. And we want to invite you into this. If you've been pushing off baptism because you think it's not my time, I have doubts, still I'm not 100%. I didn't get baptized when I was 100%. Chances are your coaches didn't get baptized when they were 100%. It's moving in faith. But the foundation of your faith is trust. And at some point, you're going to have to trust that you're in good care in God's hands, even with your doubts, and you can move into a new life with him. Baptism represents the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ in your life. If the resurrection didn't happen, all of this is useless. But if the resurrection did happen, if Jesus raised from the dead and now lives forever and is offering you payment for your sins so that you can live forever too, baptism stands for a whole lot more than just getting wet. Think about it. Talk to your coaches. I hope some of the stuff in the video spurred your mind to go, wow, there really is some stuff out there that backs this up. This isn't just wishful thinking. I remember after one time when I gave a bunch of this apologetic evidence stuff, a element student who's been coming to Element for like 6 years comes up to me and goes, whoa, I never thought about it being real. Maybe that's your big takeaway. Jesus is real. All right. Have a good conversation with your small groups. I love you all. I hope you have a great week.